Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with musician and inventor Don Lewis. In part 1, we talked about his upbringing and his early influences. In part 2, we talk about his music, his inventions, and his contributions to a changing technology and a changing culture. Hope you enjoy it. And you and I have had this conversation before, the idea that there are different phases of, human development, so to speak, and there is a point at which we realize that we know a lot less than we think we do, And I mean, as when you're younger, you think you know everything, of course, but I think the more we learn about what we don't know, the more that curiosity comes out and, that desire to co-create, as you say.
You just brought back again another high school encounter with a professor there. William Young, my first science teacher, general science teacher, and his first lecture wasn't anything about science. He says, if you don't learn anything more out of this course than what I'm about to tell you now, I'll be happy. He says, I'm here to teach you to find out what you don't know.
That's what science is all about, isn't it? Exploration?
Yes. And that stuck to that was 60 years ago. No, longer than that. But that has always been that stuck with me all my life. It stuck with me all my life. Between him and Sam Ewing, who was my instructor that electronics course, those two guys stood out. And then, of course, my high school counselor, Ann Jackson, who I was scrimmaging with my grandmother. The two were scrimmaging for whether I was going to be an engineer or whether I was going to be a musician.
Oh, I love it.
So those are a couple of people that I can look at. And of course, my life, to me, it's what I discovered. I mean, it's about people who inspire me. The inspiration that came from Carlos with Switched on Bach. The inspiration I got by working with people like Mr. Takahashi. The fact that I could inspire him to do things out of me trying to do things, and he wanted to manufacture what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. The whole idea, the rhythm in it is one, but what was even bigger than that was what I call Leo, Live Electronic Orchestra.
That's one thing I wanted to get into. Yes. And that's a perfect example of pushing those limits.
Yes.
You had these restrictions, and the parallel that I can draw to that, I was talking earlier about the Beatles recording on 4 tracks. You had people like, for example, Jeff Emmerich, who would go into the studio and would say, okay, we want to create this thing. How am I going to create a loop? Well, I could take this piece of tape and I could take a pencil and stand back here, but same kind of thing like you were doing with Leo, the limitations were what inspired you to come up with the batshit crazy ideas that just kind of worked, right?
Yeah. And it's not that other people weren't doing similar things, but I just happened to have the ear and the eyes of a man who could take it to the next level. Mm-hmm. And he didn't do it all by himself.
None of us do.
Takahashi. In fact, the turning point for the music industry in electronics was the advent of MIDI, and he was the cornerstone for organizing it. Mm-hmm. To get 4 manufacturers, the 4 Japanese companies, Yamaha, Korg, Kawhi, and Roland, and Dave Smith from Sequential Circuits here in the United States joined up in the year before, I guess, 83, because 83 is when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1 year, came up with MIDI, and it changed the complexion. It changed everything. It gave more access because he wanted that protocol to be open source.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it gave little guy, big guy, whatever, the same opportunity. That is what is missing, I think, from most of the things that we are in trouble about now with corporations. How many remote controls do you have to watch a TV?
It's true. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
I mean, why can't we settle on a MIDI control? We're doing less with TV than we are with MIDI on keyboards and all this other stuff.
It's true. Yeah.
And we can't have any compatibility. It's crazy. So, but it is about people who have a foresight, who have a vision. And their vision is not necessarily the one they thought they had. Someone inspired them. And they implemented it, and had that much enthusiasm to convince people who were their competitors to come together and do this. That's called leadership. That is called visionary, prophetic.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you also just mentioned something else that I thought was interesting. The idea of maybe you didn't really have an idea of what you were going to create, and this happens with inventors, it happens with artists, it happens with musicians being artists, but the idea of going into something and saying, I'm going to try this, but okay, midway through the process, I'm being led someplace completely different. And some of the greatest inventions, came about completely by accident, because I thought I was going to go here, but it turned out I'm way over there down the other end of the field, because I was open-minded enough to say, I'm just going to let the creative process take me where it wants to go.
Yeah.
I think you did that with Leo, didn't you?
I think we Leo's still a living project.
Yeah, but I can't imagine that Leo, that you had this vision of Leo in your head as much as you had a vision that you wanted to do something, and then Leo sort of popped out from nowhere almost, right?
Well, I had all this stuff, it was like having a bunch of keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
Back in those days, you having so many keyboards, you had all these modules. Uh-huh. And how to get those modules to work, how to get Moog or try to get Oberheim and ARP to work together as a unit instead of them being separate keyboards.
Uh-huh.
None of them of which could play more than one note at a time. So those were the challenges. I knew that I wanted to remedy something. That was what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to remedy something that was, to me, it was just a real roadblock to have a keyboard that played one. Actually, Art did come up with two notes. You could actually get two notes out of a 2600. They came up with a keyboard that separated the two voltages, and then you could take one of those voltages and go to a different oscillator.
Well, okay. Sequential had two oscillators in their Pro 1, for example. You could detune them and get tuned.
Okay. Yeah, but you couldn't play more than at that time. You couldn't play more than one note, and they came up with two notes. And then and so I had two 2600s, and to get four notes, I had to play two notes on this keyboard and two notes on that keyboard. Okay, so there's got to be some way to change that. And Armin Pasetta had this keyboard that he came out with for Tonto with Malcolm Cecil and Bob Margoloff, Tonto.
Mm-hmm.
And their setup was powered by multiple setup polyphonic controller keyboards. I happened to find Armin. Armin got dropped in my lap, so to speak, when I first came to California, and I had my ARPs with me, but with the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought over his keyboard, and I could actually get those 2 ARPs to play 4 notes.
Whoa.
I died and gone to heaven.
That's high tech, man.
Oh yeah. And so we got to refine that later on. That's when Oberheim came out with the SEMs, the expander modules, and he put 4 of those together with his keyboard and made it actually more palatable. But even that, I still had to put it on top of another keyboard. So all of these things sort of fell in my lap, and I had to do something with them that I thought would make my performances a lot more effective and easier for me to play. So that was the brainchild of Leo and putting it all together. And it was a vision. But it was a vision because I was hurting too much trying to play all these keyboards. So I wanted to be able to play at least 2 or 3 keyboards right in front of me and have polyphony. And if I want to do some ancillary stuff, I can, go over here and do this for a little while, but not stay over there all night.
Right, like a scarecrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose that really, it was almost a predecessor to a lot of the ideas of being able to like split the keyboard and stuff like that. I mean, that.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, on the bottom keyboard of Leo, there's 3 keyboards. The top keyboard is the Armin Passetta keyboard that controls the ARP 2600 and the Oberheims. And the middle keyboard is a Hammond, and the bottom keyboard is Hammond. But the top 3 octaves of the bottom keyboard is wired into a Pro Soloist with a sensing AfterSense touch underneath. And man, you can play some Hammond organ and have this lead on top, completely different sound from the Hammond. Now that's killing it.
What was the reaction when people started seeing what you were doing with Leo? You were more or less a pariah, weren't you?
Well, it's really interesting because there were not, as far as synthesizer people were concerned, there was not really that kind of interest in it because I think most of the synthesizer people were still playing in bands. And there wasn't much need for them to accompany themselves. But as an organist and playing alone, I needed to have the accompaniment and the freedom to have the solo.
Sure.
And so I think that was one of the things that really never worked itself up to the top priority-wise. But I always felt some of the organ companies came out with a design sort of like having the top, but it wasn't a separate part of the keyboard. It was a certain section, and you could play the harmonies, but the top note would be your melody. And so whatever it would be doubled with the melody, but the melody could be a different instrument completely. So you could have a piano playing, and on the top you could have a flute on the top note if you're playing the note like that.
Did you feel a certain vindication as technology started to catch up with you, so to speak?
Well, I never felt like I was being, I don't know if it was vindication. But it was nice to know that people were catching up.
Just this feeling of like, guys, I've been doing this for years. Where you been, you know?
Well, yeah, but everybody has their own time to mature.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to say that I would like to be in a situation where I'm still catching up to somebody else.
Aren't we always, though? Aren't always?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So,
yeah.
I guess I'm looking forward more than I'm looking backwards in that manner. Trying to catch up with other ideas. I mean, just thinking about all this new software. I mean, I'm looking at my email every day, and since Black Friday, or even 2 weeks before Black Friday, I bet you, I would say 50% of the emails that I'm getting are from software companies got a new bundle that they want to sell you, for your DAW. Sure. But just seeing that kind of activity, it's like saying, man, there's still more people out there creating stuff for you to get intrigued. And I'm pretty much a sucker for all of them, but I've been very lucky within the last couple of years of meeting people who are making this stuff. These young engineers, software writers, that are doing such great work. Geo Shred with Pat Sled.
Yeah, sure.
And gosh, who else is out there? And then there's audio modeling, Lily.
We were talking earlier about the Cherry Audio guys with their virtual modular and their vintage instruments. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan. And then this one company called Divisimate. That's the name of the product. And it allows you to do stuff that Leo was doing way before these guys come out with software. And that was to have a different voice if you make a chord, a 4-note chord, or as many notes you want, and having a different voice on each one of those notes. It's like orchestrating.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got to meet those guys would have been, the last time we had a NAMM show. NAMM show.
That was back in January.
I guess. It kind of seems like it was
still the same year. Hard to believe, but it's still the same year.
No. Yeah. Oh my God. And I met these guys there, and I actually met them before that, and I got to go to their booth and sit down and play some of their stuff. And I'm just amazed at what these people are doing, these young creators, and actually working out dreams that I had. Because I had to tell you, I don't have any software chops. I can't sit down and code. I don't have code chops. And I've been toying with the idea that maybe I should, just for a hobby. You want to have a hobby? Learn code.
Say, in your copious spare time, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, why not? Stretch your mind, because that's another part of your brain that you gotta deal with.
Well, and to your point, I think one of the things that interests me is a lot of the interfaces that are created. You can almost tell just by looking whether an interface was created by a musician or an engineer.
Oh, tell me about it. Yes, exactly.
And when you talk about, for example, the idea of, okay, I can use a different voicing for each note in my chord. Okay, so my question, the question that immediately comes up to me is, how intuitive is that? If I'm playing a gig or something like that, you know, how, I mean, you know, there's a company that, that I've worked with in the past. They're called Deskew Industries, and they make something called Gig Performer. And
Oh
Gig
yeah,
Performer,
I have that one.
I thought you might. Yeah, knowing you, I figured you might. But you know, one of the things that I liked about that was that the entire purpose of that was to simplify the complexity of all of these interfaces. And to me, that's almost, you know, we start getting down into those rabbit holes of how the programmer creates those things. And, you know, bottom line is, man, we still want to make music here, you know, and we don't want the technology to get in the way. We don't want the left brain stuff to get in the way of the right brain stuff. I mean, it's enough that as a musician, you have to go through that left brain process anyway, just to learn your instrument. But at a certain point, you want things to become so intuitive that you can almost, you know, turn off the left brain, let it function on its own so that you can let the creativity flow. And I think that that's part of the challenge nowadays of, you know, we're so deep into the technology. It's like, you know, how do you use those tools in an intuitive fashion?
Okay, so in this, okay, you really got me going now.
And another thing.
So in pursuit of emulating, so to speak, and I mentioned orchestration.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but I only use that as an example of placing melodies and notes in places for different instruments.
Uh-huh.
Okay, in the normal way, I don't really want the normal way. I don't want it to be a smooth situation. I want it to be something that is almost unexpected. That this note right here that you think will be the melody note for that instrument, and that instrument's going to be the melody note because it's the first one you hear.
Mm-hmm.
The second instrument may take over that first instrument's note for the next note down.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so it's not going to be anything that you expect to hear. And if you expect to hear it, and you're disappointed because it doesn't sound like what you thought should happen before, then you're missing the whole point of what I'm doing. I don't want it to be that way. So this is going to be sort of music concrete, depending on when that finger went down. And and so you want this joint, you want this thing to be sort of, you may have a bed, no, to keep things smooth, you may have a layer that is constant with but these other notes are jumping around. These other instruments or these other sounds are jumping around within that chord pattern that you're laying down. And
almost at random in a way, right? I mean,
yes, but there is a way that you can actually play it the way that Leo set up, that I know which way the notes are going to fall, depending on whether if I roll the chord real quickly, it's going to roll the top note is going to be on the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If quickly to the right, it's going to be from the right to left. It's going to be boo, like this. That top note's going to hold the melody. If it rolls the other way, then the bottom note will be the lowest note, and the top note will be a completely different note. I mean, different.
What you're talking about here is the whole idea of learning to use that interface.
Yes, exactly.
That's what it comes down to. To me, is UX design. I mean, it's like, how are you designing this? And I think in a lot of cases, and we can go back to the DX7. I hate to pick on the DX7, but to a certain extent, that user interface was so complex that the average musician basically just stuck with the presets.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is that's in a way, it's a shame, because we want to encourage that experimentation, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. What we're talking about here is like in the DX7 is really the programmability of that instrument from a musician's standpoint that doesn't get in the way of the performance.
Uh-huh.
And one way we got around that, there were two ways. Of course, Aftertouch was already a part of the keyboard system.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that really I thought stuck out for the DX7 was the breath controller.
Yes.
I used that breath controller. Oh man, that was the coolest thing, especially when you're playing woodwind or any wind type of instrument or anything that you wanted to have a dynamic control using the force of your breath.
Yes.
Blowing through this. And it really made it musical. It really made it musical. And which gets back to that whole idea about our frame of making sounds as humans with our voice and our breath or air and so forth. And these are the things that I think were not really looked at that hard to have expanded the creativity or the interface to these instruments. There could have been ways that you could use the breath controller to not only bring up certain sounds, but to you could have maybe one sound when you blow on it, and then depending on how much you're blowing on it, you could come in with a new sound. That kind of thing. And you can do this a lot faster than you can with your finger.
Sure. Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think the interface is still a big. There's still a lot to be desired in interfaces, especially if you've played keyboards. And what keyboard players are trying to do now that we didn't do with normal keyboards is to be more expressive on the notes that we play.
Yeah.
On the piano, the only way you can get away with expression on the piano is how many notes can you get in this certain frame and stay musical. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you express the piano, because you can't go in between the notes. So you can't go in as far as the pitches are concerned. So you can't bend that. On a synthesizer you can, but that's not the same. But on a traditional piano, and to have those kinds of skills that most people develop is much different than a guitar. Guitar is much more expressive than the keyboard.
Now, isn't that also an argument for some of these alternative controllers? You know, like I love the Rolly stuff, for example. You know, because I think it really does. You know, we come to it from these. We come to these new sounds with these traditional controllers.
Yes, exactly.
Bringing in a whole. I mean, you mentioned GeoShred, for example. You know.
Yeah.
Now, granted, as far as I'm concerned, the only person in the world that can play the GeoShred is Jordan Rudess. You know, I mean, everybody else can't hold a candle to him as far as what they can get out of it, right? But the idea is, here's a completely different kind of interface that you've never seen before, you know? And I think that, you know, it's the same way that for me as a bassist or a guitarist, if I sit down at a keyboard, it's going to force me to think completely differently about my music.
Exactly. Lynn Instruments, Roger Lynn.
Yeah, the Instrument. Yes. Mm-hmm.
He's got a great one too.
Yes.
There's a new keyboard coming out called Osmosis.
Mm-hmm.
They've had a lot of delays in manufacturing because of the COVID thing. So probably won't see any of those instruments come out until maybe mid-spring or summer.
Hmm.
but it's a keyboard that moves in 3 axes: up, down, sideways, and back and forth. And it senses, and it's polyphonic. It has its own. Also, it has its own synth engine that is used in the continuum.
Hmm. Hmm. So there again is an argument for MIDI 2.0, obviously, huh?
Well, I'm confused about MIDI 2.0 and the fact that MPE is the standard which Roller uses.
Hmm.
Also, Lynn Instruments, because they have these services that you can get that. So for what I can understand, there's these companies that came out with MPE before 2 was escaped. Are trying to figure out how they will all come together.
Yes, it reminds me of that great old saying about the nice thing about standards is that there are so many of them.
Yeah. But MIDI 1.0 still, yeah. MIDI 1.0 is still the standard until everybody finds out what they can do with this other stuff. Because that means everybody's got to upgrade their gear to get any useful music out of it or use out of it.
Of course. And then, the manufacturers will be very happy about that,
Oh yeah, and then Apple just came out with their new M1 chip,
mm-hmm.
which is going to obsolete a bunch of stuff that's on their platform until software writers can update their stuff, upgrade their stuff to work with their new chip. So I think there's going to be a little void, purgatory, between now and the middle of the year before everybody catches up. Yeah, it's not really fair in some cases where manufacturers have to try to keep up, software guys have to try to keep up with all the operating system changes, upgrades, updates and upgrades. But I guess that's the reason a lot of them have gone to the subscription model.
Yes.
Which at least there's some revenue coming in, so that they can make changes on a monthly basis or depending on how you subscribe to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have quite a future ahead of us, don't we?
Man, I'm still trying to figure out where it's all going, or where should I say, where am I going with it? How will I be able to interact with this stuff, other than getting it, looking at it, and trying to figure out what's different about this than it is about some other software.
Well, and the bottom line here is these are still just tools to create art with. And that, I think, going back to the power of limits again, some of the greatest music, some of the greatest creations have been created with the most primitive tools because that's what you had to work with.
Amen. You got it.
Yeah.
And it helps you to actually focus. The other part of it, though, I think most of the time, it's having a focus on having to complete a project. As long as you just sitting there messing with it, nothing really happens. And during this pandemic, I've been sitting around and I've been messing with a bunch of stuff, and I got a bunch of stuff that I actually created as far as music is concerned, but I haven't really finalized it. I've got lots of drafts of different things, you know what I'm saying? And trying to organize that, sit down and say, okay, this is a great idea. How can I make this something that somebody can relate to? And that's what I'm having the most difficult time now. And I think part of that is trying to get used to the idea of how, as a live musician, live performance musician, am I going to have the same interactive experience that I would have years ago, sitting down playing for an audience of something that I created.
Yes.
And it's not the same even on Zoom, because you can't do it on Zoom. You can't have that same interaction. So
right.
There are people who are working on, I'm thinking about the stuff that's being done down at Stanford with a Jack Trip, which is a software interface where they're taking a central server and connecting locations up, people all over, and putting together so there's minimum latency that they can play together. Right.
Which is, again, that whole idea of ensemble playing, of riffing off each other.
Yes.
That's what we're missing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not the same thing as sitting there trying to, now I'm starting to think, how did Wendy sit in there at studio all by herself and create Switched on Bach? Took her 2 years, but she had some meat on them bones.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. And so thinking about that process, I'm just thinking about that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought about that until you asked this question. And motivating me, because she knew that nobody was going to watch her perform that, because she didn't perform. It was, it was like sitting down writing a novel.
It's true, and just as much of a lack of interactivity in that sense.
Exactly. And if I ever get the chance to meet her, I would really like to find out what was going through her mind in doing that.
What the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, there must have been just moments of intense frustration,
Yeah.
especially because, again, she was wrestling with the limitations of the technology that she had, and how do I get from here to there?
Okay, but she did have a roadmap, and Bach was her roadmap.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
She had a roadmap.
That's a hell of a roadmap.
Yeah, but she knew where every note needed to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and when you're doing stuff in a creative situation, unless you're sitting down like you normally would do, maybe you sit down to a piano and you come up with a concept, and then you orchestrate what you did on the piano. That's what Beethoven did. I guess most of the writers did back in those days.
Mm-hmm. Right. I want this to be violins. I want this to be.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have so many other textures, and which ones are going to resonate? Which ones are going to fulfill this particular part of this composition? And why am I writing it? I don't have a patron. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
There are motives here.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and trying to find motives. And I guess right now, if I had a motive at all, would be how can I bring this nation together with my music?
That's a big lift. That's a heavy lift right there, man.
Yeah, but even if you only get 1% of those who are not together, that's a 1% more than we had before.
And that's still several million people. So,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
okay, now you're giving me. Now I didn't know this was going to end up this way. Now I got it. I have a reason to do what I'm doing, because I just can't do this in a void. It's not about what am I going to do to make this a popular piece of music. I'm not driven by those kinds of things, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I know I created this one album that's out there now. It took me more than 15 years to finally finish the first selection in it. It's called Amazing Voyage. And the Amazing Voyage is talking about really the thing that this country has to reconcile before we will ever be on the same be able to talk to one another on the same plane. And it's to reconcile our beginning. And Amazing Voyage is it's a 9-minute piece, and it's built on the theme of Amazing Grace by John Newton, who was a slave ship captain. And it took me 15 years to put this together because I didn't know the amounts of emotion that it would take to get across that ocean in that ship, in those ships. And every time, it seemed like every time I was on the cusp of possibly finishing it, software problems, because I was doing this on my computer, I almost have to start all over again. And emotionally, sitting there trying to depict what happened before that ship got on the ocean and after the ship was there, and what happened to them afterwards, my ancestors. And I just saw a piece, I think it was last week, it was on 60 Minutes, about maybe some cousins. Their last names are Lewis, and they live, it was either Alabama or Georgia, one of the southern states. I think it was Alabama. And they, and there's a town there called African Land or something like that, that they are descendants of slaves who settled this little area. And they found that there's a ship that was one of the slave ships that was in this river that ran through Alabama, I believe it was. And they sunk the ship. They burned the ship. It was done during a time when there was supposed to be no more slave trading. And somebody brought it up through there. And to get rid of the evidence, they burned the ship. And now they're finding bottom of the remains of that ship in the bottom of this river.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm saying all of that stuff. I should have all this. I didn't know this was going to come up.
Well, and that tends to be what happens when you and I chat, man. We get way down these rabbit holes. You know, we're 2 hours plus into this conversation right now. You know.
I know, but this is meaningful for me because this music, and the ordeal is something that most people who have sung this song or who have heard this song, Amazing Grace, have no idea its roots.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those people are people who are people of faith, who are completely on the other side of the world, as far as I'm concerned, as far as compassion.
Yes.
Okay. And they need to hear this. At least I need to let them know that it's available.
I agree.
I hope it would start a conversation. A place to start a conversation is a song. It's a song that we dearly love.
And to create an awareness. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is where we come from. And then this man, even though he was a slave ship owner, becomes a priest in the Church of England and an abolitionist.
Wow. Okay.
If he and
that's
if
a stretch.
Yeah, I ain't making this up. This is your history.
Yeah, you can't make that kind of stuff up, man.
Yeah, and this is the history of what we are, how we have learned to think, and then understanding that all of the stuff that was contradictory to what his reformation was, he reformed himself.
Uh-huh.
You cannot sing that song, then know the history and not be reformed.
Changes your whole perspective on it, doesn't it?
And that's what that I never was a student of history until of late. I would say of late, with probably within the last 20, 30 years. But I'm finding out that when I do find out and get a perspective, it opens my eyes to what I might have done that might have been insensitive.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Not caring, and finally getting an idea that, oh my gosh, that's not working. I got to do something different. And it's not until we come to that reckoning. And if synthesizers and music, if we have all these tools and we're not using them to pull ourselves together, what's the use?
Indeed.
So I did use some synthesizer stuff on there. I did use some sampling stuff on it. I used everything I could find my hand on. To
well,
make
for you, that's
piece.
saying a whole lot.
But I have to say that looking at our future, I think it's bright. We have a lot of challenges. We've always had them, but they're now in our face. They used to be hidden.
Yeah.
And now we can really get to work. Now we know where you stand. It was like when George Wallace stood in the on the doorsteps of that school and said, "You ain't coming in here."
Yep.
We knew who he was. He took the hood off. He took the sheet off. And now we understood his strategy.
We understand what we're up against. Yeah.
Yes. And so, and it's one thing to be rebellious, but without solutions other than annihilating the part that you don't like is a matter of why we were put here, to be able to be creators, to encourage each other to be creators, and to find hope and power in that collaboration.
That's the co-creator thing.
Yeah.
It's true. Wow. Don Lewis, thank you for being my guest.
Daniel Keller, thank you for inviting me. And may you have a wonderful, wonderful life ahead as you've done. Continue. And the service that you're doing for our community by these interviews are just incredibly thoughtful and mind-opening. Thank you so much.
I welcome the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, and thank you for giving me so much of your time and attention and your input, your perspective. There are few that can come even close. So I deeply appreciate it, and I appreciate our friendship and our relationship here as well.
All right, brother. Be safe, be healthy, stay well.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.